Hello, friends. Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to Listener Stories, a chilling series where we delve into the depths of the unknown through spine-tingling tales submitted by you, our listeners, from eerie encounters with the supernatural to inexplicable phenomena that defy all logic. Join us as we navigate the shadows of the human experience and explore the darkest corners of the imagination. Each episode promises to leave you on the edge of your seat, questioning what lurks in the darkness and what secrets lie hidden in the night. So dim the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for a journey into the realm of the unexplained. Backcountry camping trip in 1975. My brother and I just loved to backcountry camp in the beautiful Shenandoah Mountains nestled in the soft rolling ranges of Virginia. We had a spot we picked out years earlier that was about a mile from the nearest firebreak. Each year, we would haul out just a little more equipment to make the experience more comfortable. Now, we never brought any guns or hunting equipment because we were into it just for the enjoyment of the clean air, views, quiet, and the sights and sounds of the various animals. This year, we actually went through the trouble of bringing out a car battery to power the stereo to provide a party atmosphere around the fire pit at night. As usual, we stopped at the ranger station before we drove up Skyline Drive to let them know where we'd be camped. At the time, the rangers informed us that the bear population had increased to about 1 bear per square mile. We both looked at each other and were probably simultaneously thinking, "That's a lot of bears." Anyway, that didn't stop us. We drove about halfway into the park to a little firebreak we knew of, near our favorite camping spot, and started hauling everything to the site. It took us 2 trips about a mile into the woods. The campsite was incredible, as it abutted a natural overlook that had a sweeping view of the Shenandoah Valley. At night, from some rock outcroppings, you could see the faint lights of some farmsteads way down below and a bountiful starry sky above our heads. We just sat out there on the rocks talking and laughing, listening to the great music, and were downing some Hennessy sipping whiskey oh so slow. We were feeling quite peaceful after finishing off about half of the Hennessy and thought it was time to hit the sack and walk the short distance back to the campsite. We decided to tie the food in a cooler way up in a tree a good distance from the campsite so as not to entice any bears that night. At the time, we had noticed that it was very, very quiet. We could no longer hear the buzzing of the locusts. Even the faint breeze from the cliffs seemed to die off. Thinking it was strange, we then settled in and were talking to each other from tent to tent, laughing about whatever came to mind. Then we heard the sound of a very large branch breaking nearby. You could tell it was a thick branch from the low-pitched thunk it made, and it had to have been made by a large animal. It seemed like the entire forest became incredibly quiet. We quietly acknowledged about what we had heard and were anticipating the sounds of some creature walking around the woods after that. Then we heard the sound of another large branch cracking in two. This was even closer still. We didn't say a word and just listened intently. James whispered that it was probably a bear. I wasn't so sure after that because what I heard next sounded more like a bipedal creature, because I could definitely hear what seemed to be the footfall of 2 large feet in the crunchy leaves. If it was a bear, you would be able to hear multiple footfalls through the leaves. We had previously seen and heard enough bears that we could tell the difference. At that point, we were transfixed with fear, just waiting for what may happen next. Then, all of a sudden, the creature picked up its pace and ran towards my tent. Whatever it was stopped just on the other side of my tent fabric. I softly said, "James, it's at my tent." He didn't say anything back. Then I heard a soft grunt outside my tent. Then the grunt changed to kind of snort, then grunting again. I was guessing it was a bear and just hoped it would move on since the food was tied off in the tree. I couldn't tell what it was, but I remember thinking that it didn't sound like any bear I'd ever heard before. And I was trying to decide if it could be a deer. We quickly thought that deer wouldn't be wandering around the woods at night, but would probably be bedded down for the night. I kept as still as a statue while this thing was just on the other side of my tent. Then my brother's voice suddenly pierced the air, saying, Okay, whoever you are, we have a gun and we're going to shoot you, I swear. Thank God he said something. I thought I was going to die of a heart attack or this thing was going to charge through my tent and snatch me, never to be heard from again. James then repeated his threat. Just then, whatever it was started to slowly back up and away from my tent. Again, it sounded like a very heavy creature and walking bipedally. We could hear the steps continue until the forest became quiet again. We never got out of our tents either, possibly foolishly thinking they were providing some protection. I don't know how I ever got to sleep that night, but I must have. At the time, though, I was still curious about how the creature sounded like it was walking on two legs. It couldn't have been a deer, and I wondered if it could have even been a bear, unless it was walking on two legs. There were no wolves in the forest either. At the time, I'd never even heard of a Sasquatch, so that idea never occurred to me until many years later. I'd passed off that experience for decades until I started hearing about and researching about the Bigfoot. Then the experience came flooding back, about the weird sounds of hearing such a heavy two-legged creature back then. Always assumed it had to be a bear, despite what I clearly heard and remembered. However, the idea that we could have encountered a very different creature so many years ago was apparent when my research discovered that there were Bigfoot encounters in the Shenandoahs, even as far back as the 19th century. Just thinking about that still gives me the shivers, not knowing what we really encountered so long ago, and made it out of those woods alive to tell the story. I haven't been backcountry camping since. Thank you. Signed, Scott. The Little Men. When my husband was a child, he used to see what he called the little men in his house. He saw them a few times from about 8 years old to maybe 12. He would only see them at night and only in his basement, never outside or in anyone else's home. He describes them as being about 7 or 8 inches tall, and they are all one solid color, as if they were wearing morph suits. He saw red ones, green ones, and cream-colored ones. No facial features, no hair, etc. He said they really looked like people in morph suits. They were completely silent, no sound while running, no talking, etc. But he did hear them open and close drawers, cabinets, and other things. Whenever one would see that he saw them, they'd run off into a bathroom or the laundry room. He would follow them, but they'd be gone by the time he got there. Once he saw one going in the cabinet under his bathroom sink in the basement, and when he looked, it was gone. There was always more than one at a time. He never saw just one. He said they used to weird him out, but not really scare him. They were usually running along the walls and not really out in the middle of a room. The basement was well lit and he could clearly see them. Of course, his family didn't believe him because he was a child. He had a friend sleep over one night and they were in the basement playing video games. His friend stopped playing and asked him something like, "Did you see that? I just saw 2 small red people run into the bathroom." That's when he got scared and told his friend how he was hoping it was only his imagination and explained everything to him. The two of them saw them a few more times until they just weren't there anymore a few years later. My husband thinks that they were either collecting something or looking for something. They seemed very exploratory in nature. Nothing was ever missing that he noticed. He was a kid, so he hadn't been drinking or anything like that at all. My husband absolutely does not lie. His friend, sadly, passed away, so I can't ask him about the little men, and no one else saw them. My husband doesn't really like talking about these beings, but said it was okay if I ask you all. He always got the feeling that they weren't malicious, but that he shouldn't go hunting for them too much. So, does anyone have an idea what these may have been? Thank you all so much for allowing me to share his story. Signed, Autumn. My experience living on evil land. It began in the summer of 2013 when I got a divorce and had to move out of my home in the suburbs of Southern California. I met someone, my current husband, pretty soon after the divorce, and things moved quickly and he asked me to move in with him and I accepted. He had just bought his dream cabin on a local mountain range with an inheritance he received. We were in Southern California and the mountains and lake are popular tourist destinations. At the time, I was struggling a lot. I had to quit my teaching job due to severe stress and had lost a substantial amount of weight and was barely 100 pounds. Looking back, I was probably an easy target due to my vulnerable state. We moved that winter just in time for me to vacate my previous home I'd once shared with my ex. It had just stormed and there was ice and snow on the ground. The new house was really dark and just felt sad to me, especially on cold, snowy days. But it was a beautiful cabin that was on a long private dirt road in the woods. The house was a larger chalet-style home with dark wood beams, brick and wood walls, and a big old wood-burning stove. Shortly after moving in, we found that the lady that had previously owned it was hit by a drunk driver and had to move into a care facility for the severely impaired, which kind of creeped us out a bit. I immediately realized I didn't quite like living in the mountains. The people in the town, especially our handful of neighbors, were really strange, paranoid, and rough. There was just a negative energy there, especially in certain parts of the mountain. I was so in love with my then boyfriend that I thought I wanted to make him happy and knew how much he loved it there, so I didn't say anything at first. The first time I noticed the negative energy was about a week after we moved in. We went for a hike towards early evening. We wanted to explore the miles of wilderness behind our home and were excited. As we walked further along, we saw old abandoned ranches and log cabins. There was even one area that had some evidence of witchcraft. There were many local legends of a satanic cult that referred to themselves as goat men. As we walked into a thickly wooded area, all the hair on my body suddenly stood up, and I noticed an electric charge in the atmosphere, along with noticeable, deafening silence. I tried to ignore this creepy feeling and kept walking. A few minutes later, my husband-to-be stopped in front of me and said he just realized we weren't on the trail anymore. We looked back, and sure enough, there was no trail in sight. The sun was now setting, and the scenery was disorienting. After about an hour of trying to find our way home, I started to cry. It felt like we were going in circles, and I was sure we'd end up as missing people. But luckily, we found a trail that led us back home. I think that this was the day something from the land attached itself to me. Soon after the incident in the woods, I started to feel oppressed by something very dark. I started doing things that are really out of character, like binge drinking and picking fights. I would almost go into a trance, and from what my husband tells me, I'd run out into the forest and disappear for hours during fights, even late at night. I have no recollection of this. I only remember standing in front of our house late at night with cut up bare feet and being confused and disoriented. My husband would be upset and tell me he had been frantically looking for me for hours, but it never seemed to me as if any time had passed. I got a job working at a local church camp. I'm not super religious, but jobs up there are scarce. I noticed that the only time I felt semi-normal was while I was at work. I felt like I was having some kind of internal battle between good and evil. Well, I spiraled down at home. I got diagnosed with a severe illness that no doctor could really explain, was constantly in the hospital, and was put on heavy narcotics, which only aggravated my spiral downward. We seemed to have really bad luck, too. For instance, one time my husband was driving in a really remote part of the mountain when his car broke down. So I jumped in my car to go pick him up, when suddenly my car blew a gasket through the hood, which no mechanic had ever seen or could explain. I had to hitchhike to where my husband was, and we had to tow both cars. My husband's car had absolutely nothing wrong with it and worked just fine after we had it towed. Yet, it would always break down periodically and always in a remote part of town with no cell service. We lived way off the beaten path deep in the woods. Something always seemed to go really wrong. Just before things would go wrong, I'd get that creepy feeling where my hair stood up and the feeling of electricity was in the atmosphere. As things progressed, one day after drinking and taking pills, I remember feeling pulled out into the forest. I went stumbling through the woods sobbing and having an overwhelming urge to kill myself. I kept thinking that was the only way out. This was a common thing I started doing, and it was as if I was in some kind of trance. I remember constantly feeling paralyzed with fear, sorrow, and despair. I began to feel like my true self was gone and I couldn't get to her. I began to feel numb. Regardless of how much I was unraveling at home, I was still functional at work and even managed to get a few promotions. It felt like I had two personalities at first. Around this time, weird things started to happen around the house. It would start with the electrical feeling, goosebumps, and then bam! All the lights and ceiling fans would turn on full blast, all on their own. I'd come home from work and think someone was in our home because all the lights would be on. One time, I was sleeping and I could hear the remote control button for the fan speed clicking on and bam, all the lights and fans turned on. I would get out of bed and yell, "Stop it!" and hide the remotes for the fans and TV. It started taunting me. It would turn on all the electronics late at night, if I laid down for a nap, or any time I was laying in my room feeling depressed. It was like it knew that pushed me over the edge. Around this time, we felt an oppressive presence and like it was watching us sleep. It was then that what had been causing all the problems revealed itself to me. There was a small wooden door in our bedroom that led to the attic, and one night I had a nightmare that felt incredibly real of watching myself sleep from a different angle in the room when a pure black demon with tight black shiny skin, red eyes, and a goat-looking head and giant horns came out of that door and was crouched down watching me sleep by my bedside while breathing what looked like smoke down around my body. As it stood up and reached for me with its long, pointy fingers, I suddenly woke up choking and in a panic. I looked over and the attic door was open. Now, that door was extremely hard to open and you had to really tug at it due to it not fitting quite right and rubbing against the door frame. We always left it shut because it was cold, creepy, and drafty up there. Terrifying. After that, I dreaded going to sleep and would often stay up all night drinking and descending into madness. No matter where I was, I always had the sensation of being watched, but I was too afraid to sleep, especially in our room. When all the electronics would turn on or when I'd get goosebumps, I knew the demon was near. It really scared me that I couldn't see it, but I knew what it looked like and I could feel its presence. Things at work eventually even got weird too, and I could barely function. I felt like I was hanging on by a thread. I was an emotional, suicidal wreck, and in heavy counseling, drinking heavily and popping pills. My relationship was on the rocks, and I'd become a regular at the bar and liquor stores. I was completely out of control and was beginning to get evil, intrusive thoughts. One night, I was in a rage and picked a fight with my husband. I don't remember it, but the next day when I was begging him for forgiveness after he threatened to leave, he told me I didn't even look like myself and that my eyes and face looked dark and evil the previous night while we argued. Then he told me that I had shoved and hit him, and my heart broke into a million pieces. I'm not an angry, violent person at all, normally. That broke me. I couldn't stop acting that way, though, no matter how hard I tried. I hated myself. One night, I got a call from a friend from my hometown who also happens to have abilities. She told me that the land there was bad, and that she won't go up there to visit me and that I should consider moving home. She had a friend that had also moved up there after divorce and experienced a similar oppression and fled the home in the middle of the night, taking only her animals. She had seen something that she refused to talk about. It clicked right then. Whatever was up there was evil and was affecting me deeply. I broke down and begged my husband to leave. He is the type to do anything for me, so we both started job hunting in the town we wanted to move to, and he listed the house for sale. The second I got hired, I threw some clothes and my dog in my car and never looked back once. Luckily, our home sold pretty quickly because we had priced it to sell ASAP. The dread slowly lifted as I made my way down the mountain and back into the city, and I felt like I could breathe. I remember thinking how dark it always felt up there with all the trees. It felt suffocating. Within a month of moving away, I started to feel back to normal. At first, there was still some activity like the demonic dreams, and one time being woke up by something that felt like a pillow hitting me with a crazy force across the face. About a month after moving, I decided to have a cleansing done by a Reiki master and psychic medium. I was stunned and terrified when the Reiki master/medium described my evil attachment in detail, just as I saw it, and it even shook her to the core and scared her, frankly. It wasn't easy to remove, but moving away and abstaining from taking any substances had weakened its grasp significantly. It mostly stopped after the healing sessions, prayer, and self-protection exercises, and I completely lost any desire to drink and switched medications to a non-narcotic. I've never been a drinker and to this day have on average 1 or 2 beers a year. My personality went back to my happy, loving self. The thoughts of suicide seem like a bizarre memory. My marriage is solid, and we are like any normal, boring couple. A few months after moving, we did receive a call from the couple who bought our house asking if we ever noticed weird or demonic activity in the home. They just kind of made a joke like, haha, never mind. We'll just stick to our plan to get an exorcism done. I felt like there was no point in telling them as it was never the home, it was the land. It was like a terrible nightmare that creeps me out just telling my story. I even avoid talking or thinking about it due to weird feelings it gives me. I feel like part of my soul is gone forever. I can never take back what I put my poor husband through. I'll never view things the same. I know there is real evil out there, and it wanted my soul. Thank you. Signed, Anonymous. The Supernatural Traveler and His Dog. Steve, thank you so much for reading my last story. It really brought some joy to my heart to hear you read it. I'm sending in another story, and this story is absolutely true. Feel free to edit this story however you see fit. I noticed that you edited a word out in my last story, and I apologize for having that in there. So I just wanted to give you the freedom to do with this story as you need to in order to read it comfortably. Thanks again, and I hope you enjoy this story, and I hope it's not too long. One day, as I sat in my vehicle on the shore of one of my favorite lakes in Texas, I was privileged to behold one of the most fascinating sights I'd ever seen in my life. This is a well-known state park that stretches for 10 miles, with many horseback riding trails, biking trails, and walking trails. Though a very beautiful park with mildly rolling hills running through it, some interesting lore about this lake is that it's known for occult gatherings coupled with mysterious and dark activities which occur out in its woods. Just to give you a little more of the nature of this state park, I'll say this quickly before I get into my main story. One day I was 1 or 2 miles out in the woods exploring some of its old and seldom used roads when I happened upon a circular area that seemed like a gathering place. It occurred to me that this might be a place where the infamous satanic gatherings or rituals might have taken place. And to be honest with you, it was as if I could sense that there were spirits there, and I was being watched by more than one person, though there was nobody around. Making my way out of that area, I suddenly saw the image of what is known as the Eye of Horus hovering in the air, about 6 foot off the ground, and it was about 20 feet away from me, acting almost as if it was hiding from me behind a tree. I'm sure that there are those who are familiar with the design of the Eye of Horus. It was exactly like the design that's depicted in pictures, and it was perpendicular, about 1 foot tall, and completely red. It was intently watching me as it hovered in the air. Being transparent in appearance, yet being red, it was like an apparition. It followed me, and as it followed, it would disappear and then reappear from tree to tree, moving along with me as I walked through the woods. Strangely, it would act like it was literally peering from behind the tree at me. Seeing that it was determined to watch me, I made up my mind that I would not let it scare me, though I grappled with encroaching fear. As it watched me, I spoke to it and told it that it could not do anything to me, that it was not allowed by the Most High God. I made it back to my car and haven't seen this red apparition since, but again, I haven't been back in that area since. The park is absolutely beautiful, but I always make it a point to get out of the park when dusk begins to set in. Getting on with my story, I've spent many hours of study, meditation, and prayer out on those shores of this lake, and as I meditate, I will gaze out across the lake. On this particular day, I sat gazing out across the lake in my thoughts, when suddenly I saw a man climbing up out of the lake water, as if he was climbing up out of an old cellar. Dressed in casual, everyday clothing, he also carried a large bag across his back. I was astonished as I watched this anomaly taking place, out on the surface of the water, questioning if I was really seeing what I was seeing. He climbed completely up out of the lake and onto the surface of the water as if he had stepped out on dry land. Behind this man climbing up out of the same mysterious hole came a large dog, which also stepped up onto the surface of the water without sinking. These two, the man and the dog, proceeded to walk across the surface of the water without making any splashes with their feet until they reached the lake's shore, and then continued walking up over the landscape until they disappeared out of my sight, traveling in the direction of the city. Now, this body of water does not have any man-made structures built within its banks. Having experienced this only a few years back, I've only told this story to about 2 or more people. If it helps in unraveling the mystery of what I saw that day, I would like to share some information with you that was shared with me from who I believe to be a very legitimate source. This information comes from an ex-occultist who had mastered many mysteries of esoteric knowledge. He claims that any body of water on the earth is a portal to and from the unseen realm. And this ex-occultist claims to practice this craft himself to travel into the unseen realm. Now, I'm not advising anyone to do something like this, but my reason for mentioning this is to possibly make sense of what I saw that day. Feel free to make of it what you will. The spirit realm is strange and very real, and is able to do things that man's carnal reasoning does not want to accept. I know what I saw that day, and both the man and the dog were in solid form. And I know that man has been given the powers to do supernatural things, both in the kingdom of darkness and in the kingdom of light. But sadly, man is too logical to pursue the powers that are at his disposal. I know that Jesus walked on the water, and if he walked on the water, mankind has been given a subtle yet loudly spoken message that he also can do the same. I believe we should press into the spirit realm to learn more and to obtain the ability to do supernatural things. But even the complacent get a glimpse of its mysteries once in a while. Well, I hope that these stories hold more clues to unlocking the mysteries of the unseen realm. I personally believe that science fiction isn't really fiction and that anything is possible, and that makes life really exciting with an element of danger. Thank you again for presenting my story. Sincerely, Clifton. Well, there you have it. Let us know what you think about these stories in the comments below, but please be respectful of the opinions of others. And if you have any strange stories you would like to see featured in an upcoming video, email them to nationalparkmysteriesyt@gmail.com. We're very interested in stories that detail encounters with ghosts, humanoids, cryptids, or any type of other unknown entity that is beyond explanation. Thanks again for listening, and please be sure to give us a like on the video and to share and subscribe for more strange stories. Meanwhile, be good to yourselves and each other. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.